The 2024 Polyglot Gathering is brought to you by Glossica.
Okay, guys, let's start another talk. Welcome to idiolects, prescriptivism, and how to make a foreign language your own. Please remember about Slido, so I hope you scanned the QR code. If not, you can scan it now. You can ask questions during whole talk, but the answers will be at the end. So, yeah, Charlotte, thank you.
Okay, hi everyone. I'm gonna come around here, so we're all closer. So the title looks a little bit technical, a little bit linguistic-y. I'm not a linguist, so hopefully it's gonna be quite accessible for the layperson. So we're gonna get started with idiolects to begin with, and the first question is, what is an idiolect? And there's a lot of debate about this term, lots of sort of very niche opinions on what it could be. For our purposes for today, we're going to go with it being a microlanguage, the language that an individual speaks. So if you take the word itself, idiolect, we have idio, which is you get it in idiosyncrasy, own or self, and then lect is a distinct variety of language. So we have a little list of lects there. So your idiolect is influenced by your dialect, by your genderlect, by your sociolect, by all of these different things. And that makes within you a unique way of speaking and a unique way of expressing yourself. And the term was first coined by the linguist Bernard Bloch in 1948. And he said it's the totality of the possible utterances of one time in using a language to interact with one other speaker. So what's interesting about what this means for your idiolect is that it's very, very changeable. And if you think about the language that you use throughout the course of your life, it is changeable. It does change through as you grow older, new words you learn, new experiences you have. It changes the way that you speak and the way that you express yourself. Through the 1960s, there were some linguists that really argued against the idea of idiolect at all. So they were more concerned with dialect, with sociolect, like lots of linguists. What we find now is that the term is very often used in forensic linguistics to talk about the authorship of text. So when you're looking for, cases that go to court for text message authorship or emails, that's where you see a lot of research into idiolect. Because there's obviously, if it's one person's language, it's very, very, very difficult to study. A couple of reasons for this are, one, how do you study this over time? And how do you study it without the influence of observation? And then the second one is that it's superseded by things like dialect. So dialect becomes easier to see and more important. So then linguists have to ask themselves, how do we study something so changeable? And how do we study something superseded by something else? So then why talk about it at all? Why do we care about idiolect if it's so unique and so individual? Because we're all kind of self-obsessed. And I don't mean just taking selfies, but you are the person you spend the most time with. You individually spend all your time looking at how you interact with the world. You know yourself the best. You know the way you speak the best. And even if you don't know why you say it that way, you know when it's not right. So one of the linguists I read said that understanding idiolect is the first step in language awareness, and we want language awareness to be able to understand other people and communicate with them effectively. So it's a good place to start when you're looking at your own idiolect. How can you become more aware of the language you're using and why you're using it that way? So these are some questions if you want to think about this yourself. Why do you use one word over another word? So why do you use this word from this place? Why do you pronounce a sound in a particular way? Is it from your family or is it from somewhere else? And then why don't you always use standard grammar? So this is specifically languages that you know very well. In my case, I'm talking a lot about English. It's my native language. Your native language, your near-native languages, how do you express yourself in a very individualistic way? But this is very abstract, so let's abandon that. And I'll give you some examples from the way I speak, and then hopefully you can think about how happens for you. So, how does my idiolect present itself? And I've picked 3 areas. So we have pronunciation, phonology, we have vocabulary, lexical choices, and then we have standard, non-standard grammar. So if we start at the top left here, obviously if you're listening to me and you speak English, I have a British accent. It's not super regional sounding, especially if you're not from Britain, you probably think like, oh, it's just that. But if I say the first word on the left, I say grass, not grass. I'm not saying there's long A's, because I'm not from the south, I'm from further north. And I have tap there just because that's the bath tap split. So that's, if you're in the south, you say bath, grass, not bath, grass. And then more specifically, in the region that I'm from, which is across the middle, if I say the next 2 words, I say cut and but. So the sound, which is very specifically that region. So you can use your phonetics to really pin down where you're from. Then if we move into the lexical choices, the first 2, again, are words that I've used growing up. They're words from my region. First one is mardy. So it's like sulky, like a child can be mardy if it's gonna, start screaming in a shop. And that's one you hear a lot as a child. So that's a word I use. That's from the whole region of the Midlands in England, which is where I'm from. The next one is very specific. So this word jitty is, I live in a mining town, so they did coal mining up until 40, 50 years ago. And that means we have these houses, and they're built house, and then you have this little alleyway where you can get to the back of the houses. And in my village, in my town, we call it a jitty, and someone 20 kilometers away will call it something else. So my mum calls it something else because she's not from where I'm from. So we have these really pinpoint even down to like the village you've grown up in. Then the next one is scran. So this is a fun Geordie word. So it's from Newcastle, which is much further north. It means to eat, but I take it as maybe a different connotation, to eat quickly. So you scran it, you eat it quickly. And it's a word that I heard, and I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. Like, yeah, scran it, just eat it. Prepone's the same. You, instead of postponing something, prepone it. And it's a very big thing, I think, in Indian English. It's a handy word. Why say 4 words when you can use 1? Then bathroom versus toilet. If you're an American, you can say I'm going to the bathroom, even though there's no bath in there, probably not going to have a bath. But because I have American friends, I say this more, and then I go home, oh, I'm going to the bathroom. Where? There's no bath in there, it's fine. And then your interests will affect the way that you speak as well, and the kind of vocabulary you use. So we have jargon within a field, so whatever field you work in, you probably have specific jargon that you use, but you can use it outside of that as well. So your interests, your work, your specializations, they're all gonna affect the way that you talk. So if you know how to cook, you might know how are you folding in? What does folding in an ingredient mean? Well, it's stirring or mixing. But if you don't know these fields, you're not gonna know these words. And if you do, you might use them outside of it. So one of the things I think we all have is specialized knowledge of language learning terms. So some of these you can obviously use outside of language learning. Something like reps, you might use at the gym, but you might use it for your flashcards. Fluency is a big one, because even within our interest, we're all gonna have different connotations of what that is. We're gonna have different lines in the sand where we say, I am fluent, you are fluent. So yeah, if there's any on there you don't know, then some more to learn. And then finally, back to standard and non-standard grammar. So we all do this in our languages. It's not incorrect, it's just not standard. So something I might say to someone if they're talking and I don't really care, oh, what are you on with? Like, what are you talking about? And so that's a very specific northern way of saying it, and then you might hear in the UK in general, what are you going on about? What are you on about? And then what are you talking about? So if you take that, think about your idiolect in whichever language you are most comfortable with. what are some key features that you have? What are some ways you really express yourself? And so I talked about non-standard a lot. So the issue we have when we look at doing this in a language that is not our native language or one that we're not super comfortable about expressing ourselves in is that we butt up against this idea of standardization and prescriptivism. So you are going to learn when you start learning, if you're learning from a course or a textbook or a class, very standardized forms of the language you're learning, obviously. But then when it becomes prescriptivist, that's where you may encounter problems. That's where we face language discrimination against non-standard forms. Like, how many times in your native language has someone else in your native language told you that you're saying something wrong? Well, it's not wrong, is it? Because you can say it. And as long as there's no miscommunication, it's functioning as it should. So this is a really interesting article that, it's 10 years old, but I recommend you have a look at if you're interested in this. And basically I have this quote, which is the point I just made, but ever had a disagreement with someone over whether an ambiguously shaded object was actually blue or green? Congratulations, you've witnessed differences in idiolect. As far as the philosophers are concerned, you're both seeing the same turquoisey, blue, teal object, but you've each drawn a mental line on the continuous color spectrum in slightly different places. Who's right? You're both right, according to your own idiolect. Go ahead and consult some authority, maybe the creator of the Pantone color chart, but really you're just surveying other people's idiolects. So if you're looking at the same thing, calling it something else, you know, if it's in that spectrum of it's not really wrong, it's just a difference of the way you're expressing it, then it's not wrong, it's just the way you speak. And this is, the interesting point I like about this is, for English, we don't have a body that says this is right and this is wrong. Like, we don't have someone protecting the language because it's so prevalent, obviously. And that's why we have words like irregardless in the dictionary, and it's why literally can mean figuratively and also literally, because we are using language, it's not using us. So if you want to express yourself in that way in a new language that you're learning, how are you going to do that? Standardization has its uses when we start learning, and when we're learning to read as well in our native languages, if you learn a native language that is also written. This is from the late 1500s. So it's early modern English, it's Shakespeare's English. But I just wanted to show you how some of the words are still the same, but they're spelt differently because this is before the first dictionaries were printed and it's before we had standardized language. Yeah, we need that to learn to read, we need that to learn, but we need to branch out from that as well. But yeah, the spelling's mostly the same. We have an interesting form of the was shewed instead of was shown. But yeah, Shakespeare's English. So with all that in mind, how are you then going to take your individual expression into a new language you're learning? And when are you going to do it? Because if you're learning day one, can you express yourself, or are you just going to say, hello, my name is, I'm from, that kind of thing? So we'll look at 3 areas. First one is accent. Yeah, you're going to have an accent from day one. If anything, you're going to have more of an accent. You're not going to say some of the sounds properly. And that's fine. That's part of who you are. That's going to carry on through and through. And of course, you can have that goal, and it's a very, very admirable goal, to get rid of your accent and pick an accent. But then which one are you picking and why? Because that's also a choice you're making, an individual choice. And even if you make that choice, you might find that some of your original accent will still come through. If you watch anything American that's got a British actor doing an American accent, sometimes we're quite good until we get loud, and then we can't hold it anymore and we start being British again. So it happens even in one language. So you have it there. Vocabulary, you can also adapt from day one. You're going to learn things like I started learning Polish with Pimsla. So I learned, jestem Amerykaninem, but I'm not American and I'm not a dude. So I need to learn something else. And you can take these phrases and these set things that you learn and then add your own little twist of what you need. Obviously, it seems a bit annoying sometimes to learn the phrases, the words you don't need. But we go back to the idea of language being a communicative tool. Other people are going to need to know, are going to need to use them, so you're going to need to know them. I'm going to need to know if someone's telling me he's American, so I need to know that, but I don't need to use it. So you make the changes for yourself, learn the rest of it's going to be useful. Grammar's tricky, because if you're using non-standard grammar on day one, someone's going to tell you it's wrong, and sometimes it's just going to be wrong. So that one will develop over time as you choose where you want to go, who you want to speak to. You're going to learn more of the grammar. You're going to learn where you can play in a way that still is accurate and is still not causing miscommunication. It's one of those things that comes over time. And that brings me to the easiest way to do this. You need exposure. You need to read, you need to listen, you need to watch things, you need to spend time with the language. So steal from the language, steal like a magpie would steal, but also play like a magpie would play. Like, play with what you want to say, play with how you want to say it. Like, what kind of person do you want to sound like? You could have the weirdest accent in the world if that's fun for you and if it still makes sense. And as we go into the final stretch, language is ultimately a tool. Whatever else comes with it, that's fine. But it's a tool you should use, and a tool you should use in a way that works for you. So use it to communicate, use it to express yourself, and importantly, use it to forge connections. Because a lot of this is about you as an individual and your unique way of speaking and you as an island. But we aren't islands, and that's not how language works. How do you find an idiolect as a part of a community? And the answer is that it just is. Every turn of phrase you've learned from someone, every word that you use, all of these ways that you speak come from the people that you've met, the people you haven't met but you've heard or read, and those connections that you've forged with others. And I think that's the important part, and it's what Peter said at the opening ceremony yesterday. We can focus on the differences all we like, and that's quite easy to do, and it's really interesting. But what's also interesting is to look at the way that you speak and why, and trace it back to where. Like, who taught you to speak like that? Where did you pick that up from? Why did you do it? And I think I've been a bit quick, but that's it. So yeah, if we do have any questions.
Thank you so much. I wanted to ask you if you can give us an example from a language that you have been learning. Like, how did you develop this?
So I write a lot in my languages. I don't speak as much. One of the things I found that transferred from my English to my German, I say actually a lot in English. It's like I want to clarify everything all the time, be very precise. And so in German, I started using eigentlich a lot. And people are like, oh, you're using it in the wrong place. You're doing it wrong. It's in every sentence. I'm like, yeah, but that's just how I express it. So it's things like that. It's the little quirks sometimes that you carry over. And then pronunciation as well. There's sounds that I can't make properly, sound a little bit weird, but that's part of my accent now.
So, for instance, with actually, did you find out what a German-speaking person uses instead, and you started to use it like that?
So there's eigentlich and tatsächlich, and I don't really know the difference, so I keep using one wrong. But it's not understandable, it's just not correct. So yeah, thank you. Oh. Okay, does mixing up languages count as an idiolect? Is it how you're speaking? Yes. Yeah, we do get, when you look into it, there's a lot of talk about code switching and translanguaging. One of the interesting things we've talked about is, like, when you have an idiom in another language and you speak a new language and you just directly translate it, that's very, because it's idiomatic. So yeah, that would count as your idiolect if that's the way that you speak. And you'll see that a lot with, I'm talking a lot about speaking English because that's what I speak most of the time. But lots of collocations when people don't have English as their native language, because we have so many of, like, the way we use verbs For example, I got a message from a colleague about this presentation, and she's Turkish, and she was like, oh, when will you make your presentation? I was like, well, I'm making it right now. I'll give it tomorrow. So those kinds of things where it's not necessarily mixing up a language, but mixing up how you've translated it, but also code switching, yeah. Next one, very empowering speech, thank you. Thanks. How can someone handle being told that their idiolect is wrong? It's not. Like, again, your only error is a miscommunication error because the point of language is to communicate. If you can't communicate, there's a problem. But if you're just saying something, you know, and it's not standard, it's kind of fine. For me, when it happens in English, which it does happen sometimes, like, oh, you shouldn't say it like that. Like, even my mum says that to me sometimes. Then you're just like, well, I have said it like that. I can say it like that. I think be straightforward. We have a lot of issues with how languages are treated. Like, we know that with minority languages. And also within a language, there's still going to be those issues. So however you feel you can confront them, best way is to be straightforward. When you are developing your idiolect in a new language, it's a little trickier because you don't know all the rules. But if it works within the rules, who's to say? How can someone, what can you say about daring to sound like a particular accent? E.g., do rich people get a pass at speaking more regionally than poor people? Yeah, so it's quite interesting because obviously if you go for a more, what am I trying to say? If you go for an accent that's perceived as less prestige when you're learning a language, depending on your first language and that kind of thing, it can come off a bit performative. Like, what are you doing? Like, that's a bit weird. And I mean, we get it sometimes when, I get it if Americans try and do British accents. Like, what are you doing sometimes? But I think if you're going into it because you want to know those people and you want to speak to those people, accent mirroring is something we do all the time. It's something that you'll find develops naturally if you're spending time around a lot of people who speak a certain way. So I think it's kind of fine as long as you're being respectful. Just always be respectful. Do rich people get a pass at speaking more regionally than poor people? I guess that depends on the language as well. Yeah, there's definitely an element of that when I think about the UK. You get some richer politicians and stuff that will try and sound more regional and more working class to try and connect, and that can come across very, like, not genuine and not very authentic. But I think when you're learning a language, it's a little bit different, and I would presume we're all being pretty respectful all the time. So see how people react to it. Gauge it on that and ask people. How do you think the internet is affecting people's idiolects? I mean, it is. That's how we all pick up each other's slang. There's definitely words I use that I've seen them on the internet. I think it also gives us more of a generational sharing than we have historically had, because if I go on TikTok, I'm going to see a bunch of 20-year-olds saying something that I wouldn't say, and I'm going to see older people talking as well, saying things I wouldn't say. The article I cited in the talk by Gretchen McCulloch, she wrote a book called Because Internet, and that's a really interesting look at, the internet and how it's impacting language. So that's got more on the topic. Can you give us any examples of how you've incorporated your idiolect into the languages you've learned? So yeah, mainly in German, with actually, like I said, my pronunciation in any of the languages I speak, my German accent's easier because I think German and a British accent are quite close. My Spanish accent is awful. So phonology is quite easy to incorporate, and then it's just looking up the words you've got. Some of the vocabulary I have in Polish, some of it will seem quite advanced because I want to talk a lot about like films I've seen and books I've read, but then I can't talk to you about sports because I don't know what sports are. Could you show the title of the article you mentioned again, please? Yeah, at some point. We'll go back at the end and you can take a photo of that. Why are some people, me sometimes, so threatened by non-standard spelling or shifting semantics, for example, literally? Okay, I 100% used to be like this, and for me it was because I did come from an area where we spoke in a non-standard way and from a community that like wasn't doing very well. And so I self-corrected by trying to be very correct and very precise all the time. And, you know, it's just a thing sometimes you do. You don't want to be perceived as something, so you overcompensate for it. And then also, we don't like change. Humans don't like change. It's tricky to deal with. And so these things changing when you're like, oh, it should mean this, it should mean this. Oh, why are you doing that? It's normal, but we just have to remember that language is changeable. And what's interesting about idiolects is that it's likely that's where a lot of language change originates, because it can do so quickly. Your language changes over the course of your life. Your dialect may not change that much in 30 or 40 years. So on an individual level, even if you don't like these shifts in spelling and stuff, you'll have shifted from when you finished school and you were doing spelling however you were spelling, writing however you were writing, to now. But yeah, change is scary, but you can do it. Is it more the responsibility of the listener to understand the speaker's idiolect, or the responsibility of the speaker to adjust their idiolect for others? It depends. I mean, in this situation, I'm speaking more slowly than usual. I'm trying to be more clear, because it's not on you guys to try and keep up with me if I'm talking to you. You're lending me your time, and so I should communicate effectively. In a regular conversation, I mean, think about what you do. If I meet a non-native speaker of English, then I am gonna try and adjust to understand them and to make myself understandable. And then if I'm speaking German, I'm gonna try and make myself understandable. So it kind of depends on the conversation you're having, but we're all adjusting all the time. That's how language works as well. Why would you say the study of idiolects matter apart from our own self-obsession? So yeah, like I said, I think now, if you're into forensic linguistics, idiolects are very, very important. And if you're interested in language change, there is, I think, more research into how idiolects are impacting language change, because all words come from one person at first. So yeah, I think it's that kind of thing. And then, yeah, just looking beyond dialect and beyond these other lects at where does an individual fit on this spectrum and why is quite interesting. Any practical tips on how to make a language your own? I think just look for what interests you. Just customize it from the get-go. Even if you're in a class, what are some extra things you want to learn? What are some things you need to learn? And then reading and watching things, listen for and look for things that you find interesting ways to phrase it and say it, and keep those and learn those and build from there. Because once you learn, oh, so you can say it this way sometimes, you can then switch words in and out, can't you? Like, that's how you build a language. So take those building blocks and go and then make your own language. What about using British vocabulary to American pronunciation? I mean, if you speak an American accent, you're going to do that anyway. I would say it might be confusing for Americans, because we understand them more than they understand us. But it's not like, no one's gonna be like, oh, you're wrong. They're very close and we're used to each other. It's kind of fine. Would you say idiolects are even more indicative of socioeconomic status and regional origin than, say, dialects? In some ways, yes, but in some ways, no. Because if I have my idiolect and I'm from the Midlands in the UK, and then I go to Australia and stay there for 15 years, it's not going to be, the idiolect I end up with is not going to be a representation of where I'm originally from, because I'm going to adapt. I'm going to start mirroring accents. I'm going to start taking vocabulary. And of course, your socioeconomic status can change through your life. So when we talk about an idiolect being changeable, that's one of the ways in which it will change. Like, you'll find it if you've gone to university and you've done your bachelor's degree, gone to university and done a PhD, you're going to have different ways of saying things because you are talking in a particular way most of the time and expressing yourself in that way. So not really if you're going back to origins, I wouldn't think, just because they're so changeable. Do you have tips about being less insecure about pronunciation or making mistakes? So when I said prescriptivism earlier, I said it wrong, I'm pretty sure. So don't worry about making mistakes, because English is my native language and I don't speak it right half the time. Pronunciation, I guess just practice, just more exposure, and then just try saying it. It's really something, isn't it? When you get a blank look and you're trying to say something, you're like, I'm sure I did it right. But it's just kind of putting yourself out there a little bit. As pronunciation, just practice. You can practice that at home. That's a useful way. Have you had any success explaining this concept of correct versus understandable to a larger audience, aka people who aren't language nerds like we are? How? I mean, I generally go around saying it to people. I think just making the point that, are you communicating? Yes, then it's fine. There are differences. When I'm dealing with like my nieces who are at school, there are certain ways they have to learn to say and write things because they're like 8 and they need to learn to write in a standard way for their exams. But I think if you go in with, for casual speech, did you understand it? Yeah, what's the problem? I think most people in the UK, I think people are getting more used to that. We're having more of a look at our regional diversity and different accents and different ways of speaking. We're getting fairly decent about it. But it depends on your country and kind of your regionalisms within that country as well, or within wherever you're from. Awesome. Helping students to develop their own idiolects can help them effectively learn the language or make the learning much more personal. Agree. Yeah, I will. People are interested. Again, we're self-obsessed. We're interested in ourselves. If you can make a student interested in themselves in learning a language, then yeah, they probably will learn it quicker. I'm not guaranteeing it. Could you give examples of how in your language learning you adjust your idiolect? So yeah, like I said, just learn personally. If you've got a class, can you adjust anything for yourself? It's a little bit harder in that kind of situation, I think, but you're probably doing stuff outside the class. Like, what are you watching? What are you reading? What are you interested in? Take those and build from there. Tip, I once countered that word isn't in the dictionary, it doesn't exist, with, well, I just said it, you understood it, how does it not exist? That's it. So yeah, whoever that is, perfect ending line, thank you.